On today's program, we're going to show you objects made from the oldest art material man has used to create objects of art, wood. Our first artist is Sam Clow of Coshocton, Ohio. He uses power tools to carve birds.
Hello, I'm Sam Clow. I'm the bird carver here. Come on in and take a look around. Now, this area is where I do the carving. People wonder about knives. Well, I don't use very many. I have some X-Actos I use and throw the blades away because I do almost all of it with grinders nowadays. And when I get an order for a bird, whether I've made it before or not, I have to look up the pictures, see what it looks like, what shape it is, how big it is, and so forth. So I have pictures that I've collected from for many years of what they look like and how they're put together. Then I would reconstruct the outside shape of that bird on a piece of tracing paper, then transfer that to a piece of mylar, which becomes a pattern then for me to use. The next thing to do would be to put this pattern on this block of 2 pieces of gelliatong, which is the wood that I use, and trace off the shape of this critter with a pencil, and then take it to the bandsaw and cut this out. I have to put on the other view. I couldn't put it on first because I'm going to cut it off. So it has to go on separately. So now he's all squared up. It has to be rounded up. And the next thing I do is cut the head off. I like to have a bird's head show in some kind of an angle. To be straight on just doesn't look natural to me. This is the step where you have to be very careful that you don't let the thing slip. Now this is strictly a hand thing, there's no markings, but after you've done a few, you get to know about where to do it. The next step is to round up this beyond what I could do with a bandsaw. And to do that, I use a tool called a fordham, and it has carbide nodules that'll eat the wood away in a hurry. This is the head then that has been partially completed. It'll be glued on, and then this connection smoothed off, and something like an auto body filler used to smooth the connection. You'll notice that I have these crest feathers, and those are created, in my case, by taking a leaf rake and cutting it here and here and here and here, and end up with about 8 little curved feathers, and then glue these in place. I buy pewter feet. Pewter, as you know, is a combination of lead and tin. And the strength depends on how much tin you put in it. So what they do is run a steel wire through the larger ones to strengthen it. This extension here is what goes down into the mounting to hold it in place. So these are located at the right distance apart according to measurements made in the past, and then they're just down in the hole. The eyes, they're glass, they're made in Germany. I buy clear glass, and then I color them by painting the back with the appropriate color for the bird that I'm making. I have to now indicate where the feathers are to be, and then I'll cut them in and texture them. This is just the main shape of it. All of these feather groupings have different shaped feathers. And now I try to texture them, is what I call it, with a small tool that gives you the idea that they are feathers, I hope. You can imagine how many lines I have to make on an eagle. I've now finished cutting all the feather groups in, cutting the feathers, texturing the feathers, and gluing in the eye. The eye then has a filler that's used like an auto body filler to make the lid, and I have to glue the feet in. The feet and legs are glued into holes I cut there. Then I seal it with a sealer, which helps the paint and gives me a better idea if I've made a few mistakes. So at this stage of the game, I see a couple places I have to touch up. There's one right there, so I'll do that. Then the sealer is applied and it's dried and ready to paint. And I do all of the painting in this area. I have several things going at a time because paint has to dry. I use acrylic paints because they dry rapidly, and it's easy to put a wash over an original color to try to get a different color tone. If I put a brown on, and I find that if you look at the picture that there's a little reddish to it that I didn't get in there, I can put a reddish wash over that, and that will give you the same effect as it had it been painted that way to start with. I have wide brushes to do big areas. If I was doing a large area on the back of this, I'd use a wide brush. I have little tiny ones you can hardly see to do detailing around the eyes and so forth. First two coats are pretty easy, but when you start doing the detailing, you have to be very careful to get all the paint in the right place to try to make them look like a real bird. And that's probably the most difficult part of the painting.
Bob Alexander also works in wood, but on a much larger scale. He creates wooden items for display outdoors.
Welcome to our home and studio. The home is kind of a piece of art to me because I designed and built lots of things in it. Today I'm going to let you follow me through the making of one of the pieces of sculpture that I've made quite a few of. It's a wooden piece. It's a sculpture, but it's also a wind vane. This process starts with a lot of sketching. I spend a lot of time making drawings in my sketchbooks. And then from there, we enlarge this to a full-scale plan. And that's where we will begin to assemble this wind vane today. At this point, this is the full-scale drawing. And to begin to cut out some of these wooden pieces, I'll make a tracing paper drawing of it, transfer that to a piece of wood, and cut it out on a bandsaw. Now, the reason for making this out of a lot of pieces of wood, instead of making a big piece of plywood and just cutting holes, is that the plywood would be extremely weak in these thin places. Okay, we'll start to assemble the pieces here after they're cut on the bandsaw. Put the tail on here. The reason for assembling this on the plan is to check to make sure that the joints are going to fit very snug. Although not everyone does put these outdoors, they are made to go outside, and they're made with waterproof glue, and they're either dowel pinned or screwed together. So the tighter the joints are, the more likely they are to hold up in the weather outside. And once I'm sure that everything fits well, before I begin to actually screw it together, some of the pieces I'll remove and take over to a vise where I can clamp them down to carve some of the scales and textures that I want to be in the wood. Sometimes I will begin to outline some of these shapes for the scales with a knife, and then using a wood gouge, I'll come up to that edge. Or I might also use the parting tool, which will outline an edge. It makes a V-shaped cut. and these gouges for taking out the center. Okay, these gouges, these larger gouges, I use just sort of to rough out the main scale, and then I'll use a smaller gouge to put in some fine details that might make it a little bit less monotonous to look at, so that each scale is not merely smooth. I'll take a smaller gouge like this and add a texture to the scale. I spend quite a lot of time sharpening tools. There's nothing worse than to try to work with a tool that's dull, and probably actually more likely to be cut with a tool that's dull too, because you have to push harder, and if you slip, you're more likely to be hurt. Okay, after these pieces are assembled here, I put them together with waterproof glue and either screws or dowel pins, wooden dowel pins, or drill holes and pound the pegs in with the waterproof glue. The last step is painting it, and since it's going to be used outside, or is likely to be, it should be as waterproof as possible, which is why we make the joints really tight. This has a unique color feature. When it comes toward you, you'll see that it's painted only on the inner surfaces of some of the wood. When it comes all the way around, the color changes from a cool color to a warm color. And it also has a couple of propellers that will spin in the wind. It's counterweighted with these eyes weigh 2 pounds, and they are made of lead, and they are to counterweight the pivot point here. Most of the fish is behind the pivot point so that it will always swim into the wind. Art has been my life, and I imagine there are a few students who are going to see this who will make art their lives too. And I would just have one suggestion. When you're studying, don't do things like copy photographs, don't copy slides, because the criteria then for whether you've done a good piece of work or not is how well you've made it look exactly like what was already done. The important thing is to do your own thing, find out what kind of marks you make and what kind of ideas you have that are unique, and make that your goal.
Teaching materials for sharing art are available on the web at wneo.org/sharingart. Funding for this series was provided by the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation and Northeastern Ohio Education Association. NEOEA's members include elementary and secondary teachers, university professors, and support professionals, proudly serving students attending the public schools and colleges of Northeastern Ohio.